Raz, raz, raz. Okay, it's on.
I'm going to test that. Does this work? Yeah.
Not yet.
Yes, it did.
Oh, it did?
Yeah.
Okay.
I pressed it.
Oh no, we don't want this one. We have to go back. Where's this? We want the presentation. Yes, we don't want the first slide. I don't know who put the second slide, not me. It's actually nicer, this room, than the one on the other side.
I think the acoustics are nice because there are lots of soft fabrics,
Exactly.
so the voice will sound pleasant.
There's more light. The other one is darker.
Oh, and it's good that the light is from the front because my friend is going to take videos for me, so she came in yesterday to check the lighting, and it's great because last year the light was like over your head, so it's the worst light.
Yeah.
And
You're
now
right.
you have it like this, and it reflects from the face, so I think it's good.
Just beware. Ask your friend if. I mean, you're tall. You're not covered by the computer. Because that's the answer.
Sitting right there, so she has a good angle.
Okay, good. Because I don't want you to be behind this.
I think I can make eye contact
Okay.
with everyone, which means they can see my eyes.
Cool.
I'm short.
Well, then you should move. Take your. Yeah.
So you're in the right spot.
Unless you want to sit here and I switch with you. I mean, it's. No, it could be fine if you want to be here. I don't mind. If you prefer here.
Jesteś w świetnym miejscu, nie musisz się przemieszczać.
So, I think we can start our event today, our discussion. I'm going to introduce myself very briefly because I want to move to the real topic as fast as possible. But so that you know, I'm Laurence Arrigo-Clove. I work for Ascensional during the Exens event. And I really like it. It's not the first time I do it. And I usually cover topics that are more related to perfumes, brand, communications, because this is part of my experience. And with this particular discussion, what I love is that it took me to a different dimension, one that I'm not so familiar with. And by exploring it, I just became so interested and passionate about the topic that we're gonna have for you today. So maybe you are from a scientific world. I am not. And I think, this morning you really have two experts that are giving you in a condensed fashion something really, really interesting because they are experts and they can just take the most interesting and the most important points about the research that's going on. So yes, for you today, what we have prepared, it's a real immersion into the power of sense, but it's completely different than the usual topic. I mean, we are not talking about fragrances that smell good just for the sake of smelling good. We're talking about fragrances that have a healing power, and we are going to explain what kind of healing power it is, and how, basically fragrance have a fundamental influence on our health and on our lives. So very different angle than just the smelling good, the superficiality of perfumes, which we love, but this is a different topic. So now I really have to introduce, of course, our guests. As said to you, they are experts, and they're coming from different profiles and geographies, and that's made on purpose so that you have a rich I would say, discussion and a really open angle. I'll start from the West. So I'll start by Ruth, with Ruth. Ruth Sutcliffe is actually based in the United States. She's a senior fragrance and product development expert, and she has founded her own company, which is called the Scent Guru Group. She's a public speaker, lecturer at several prestigious institutes. And in the last year, she has focused her work on using and developing scents for various therapies. So you understand why she's here. Now I'm moving east to Poland with Marta Siemba, who has been inspired by the word sommelier, and she has invented and registered, actually, legally, a new word and profession. So the name is Senselier. And her work as an olfaction expert takes her to the US, to the home of Ruth, but also to multiple European countries. And she has confidential projects we cannot name, but she's also very exposed in TV shows. So she has a wide expertise, and definitely it touches very much on sensory olfaction training. So I usually like to start with not a serious question, just to, have people smile and, and everybody, kind of relax. So it sounds cheeky, but behind it, there's actually some serious factor to it. So I'm asking Ruth and Marta afterwards, of course, if I were to ask you a personal question, which is how important in your daily life is your sense of smell compared to other matters such as food, drinks, company, money, what would you say?
Obviously, my sense of smell is really important. Since a child, actually, I was very much aware of the sense of smell because I was raised on a farm, so I had good smells and very bad smells too. But I love food as well. So if I don't have a good sense of smell, then I can't taste my food as well either. So sense of smell is so important to me.
Okay, farm and food.
For my job, for my livelihood, actually. Yes, farm, yes, milking goats, things like that, and chicken coops and pig farms. It was quite interesting. But my father just, I used to watch my father shave. He used this Old Spice, remember the little porcelain cups, and he'd take his bristle brush and he'd do this, and I watch him shave, and I love that smell. And as soon as I could, I would go into my grandmother's cabinet. She always wore Miss Dior, and I would sneak some of her Miss Dior. So it's been part of my life for a long time,
Sounds like very intense connection.
Yes,
from the very beginning. And you, Marta?
Indeed, it is a cheeky question, I think, also in this audience, because we have a very unique setting today with people for whom the sense of smell is important, or at least they know that it is important. And for me, of course, I think it's at the base of my identity, because just like Ruth, I was born in the countryside and I was brought up in a tiny village with animals and, with livestock, with different plants and herbs. And for me, smelling has always been the basic thing. I thought that the sense of smell is as important to everyone as it is to me. But I also have prosopagnosia, which means I find it very difficult to recognize people's faces, including my closest family. So the way people smell, also the smell of the breath, the hair, the hands, the body, it's very confusing for me when a person that I know well changes their perfume, because then like a part of the identity is missing. And it's really important for me. So I can see the world through my nose, and of course it's the base of my professional life, and I've been able, and I think it's a huge privilege to be able to make a living for the past almost 20 years on different projects related to the sense of smell. So it's very important, and I think on this basic level it's as important to everyone And I think it's a good moment to quote a specific survey that was carried out last year. So people were asked, and it's important that two groups of people were interviewed. One of them was people around 18, 25 years old, so they called them students, and then adults. And the question was raised, how important is the sense of smell to you? Would you rather give up your sense of smell or, and then a list followed. And it turns out that 25% of students would rather give up their sense of smell but keep their phone, even though a phone is a commodity that can easily be replaced. And then 50% of adult women would rather lose their sense of smell than their hair. It wasn't as important for men as it was for women. And 21% of people would give up their sense of smell for $10,000. And I think the results of the survey, they are very surprising because what they show is actually how unaware we are, how important the sense of smell is. So this is what we need to work on, to show people that this is a crucial sense that is linked to taste, to hearing, to balance. And there was a very big increase in research around the sense of smell thanks to the pandemic. And it grew from 2,900 research papers before the pandemic to almost 13 last year. So this is something that we can really thank the pandemic for.
Marta has a long intervention, but she basically touched on all the points in terms of, where she started from, in terms of, where she grew up. So something quite similar to Ruth, I didn't know, in the countryside. Then something very personal about, how you recognize identity of people. But if you see that the title of this slide, it really sums up what Marta mentioned, that really with the research, what we know is that we are not aware, the power of the sense of smell is totally undervalued today because we are unaware of it. And so, the research that's been going on, of course, has not been probably exposed enough. And COVID has placed the topic on the agenda, so that's the good side of COVID. But there's more to be done, of course. There's much more to be done, and we're going to talk about that. So, yes, I want to have a zoom in on the impact of COVID, because I think it is a good starting point. We all heard about, unfortunately, the anosmia and the fact that a lot of people lost the sense of smell. And some of it have recovered it, but not completely. Some of it have not. Or there's also those who have recovered it, but it's twisted and it's not right. So it has created a lot of issues. And I think it's a good time to dig in a little bit more into that. And Ruth, I want to ask you, what's your shortcut of COVID and the impact of it?
Well, I just, I knew a lot of people who had COVID, and actually quite a few, because I work with the senior population, quite a few died. And so the impact of that for me personally was huge. And actually, we're in Italy. I remember when Bergamo, the city of Bergamo was really devastated by the disease. As far as anosmia is concerned, I think the silver lining, I hate to use that word, but with COVID, that's when we started learning the word anosmia. A lot of people had never heard about anosmia. They lost sense of smell. It was almost like it had to be explained what it was. But early on in the pandemic, I was starting to read all the journals. I read a lot of scientific journals. By the way, I'm not a scientist, but I love science. I read a lot of neuroscience and psychology. So I read the WHO and all that, and got actually a certificate to be a contact tracer. Anyway. So when I started reading,
I said bravo.
I mean, John Hopkins, it was really very interesting learning about the disease very early on. And, they were talking already very early in 2020 about that, the lost sense of smell, called anosmia, was an indication that you could have COVID. And so I just well, that's very interesting, because I have these sensory kits, and, I think in the UK they were starting to talk about smell training, And no one, I mean, you know, nobody really was talking about smell training before COVID. So in a way, it was like this awareness of the importance of the sense of smell was coming to surface by this unfortunate pandemic. So that's why I say the silver lining. And now, you know, and you started hearing all the buzzwords and about smell training, and you know, I think that it helped raise awareness of how important the sense of smell is, because, you know, working with the senior population with dementia, a lot of them don't have a good sense of smell, and so what I'm doing is trying to stimulate that sense of smell, because if you do not have a sense of smell, you can't smell danger. So you can't smell if there's gas, you can't smell the smoke, you can probably, you know, obviously you can't smell smoke, but you can feel it. But you know, a lot of the elderly people don't have a good sense of smell, so they don't know when food has gone bad or the milk has gone spoiled. And I have a personal, you know, a story about that later. I don't want to, you know, go on for too long and digress, but there is a story about from a Vietnam War vet who was in one of my smelling sessions, and he said his sense of smell saved his life in Vietnam. So when I asked him to tell the story, he was in the jungle and he smelled fish and garlic. And so that obviously was not the American soldiers' diet, right? It was the Viet Cong, and he was able to escape the jungle with his comrades from an ambush, and he got a Purple Heart for that. Unfortunately, he died of COVID.
Oh.
So he survived the Vietnam War because of his sense of smell, but died from COVID in 2020. It was very sad.
Yes. So I think, Marta, you also have some interesting points to feature and outline for during the COVID,
Yes.
the COVID.
Ruth mentioned a very important thing, that we started discussing COVID, you know, in the general public, that media started talking about olfaction. And before that, before the pandemic, we would treat the sense of smell as a source of entertainment, or maybe we would link it to the beauty industry, or if someone had a smell dysfunction, they didn't know where to turn to for help. And the word anosmia or the rest of the vocabulary connected with the sense of smell, people would learn because they started experiencing those problems. And I could see that the requests I would get from people were simply calls for help. So people would contact me for information, education, participation in projects before the pandemic. But when COVID hit, I started getting emails and phone calls asking me for help. So how can I navigate around the world now that I can't smell anything? Or people would complain about problems with their sleep or with nutrition, with their sexual health, and they had no idea who could help them. So they would just research who works in the area of olfaction in general and then hope that maybe they could help them. So maybe it's different in the United States, but in Poland there are no government funds around olfaction. And everything I could do to help people was done pro bono. I would work individually. I would, you know, create little smelling kits for people to work with, also for children. And people were very confused. So over the last 2 years, we could see that we have normalized talking about olfaction a little, and that people can simply say, look, I lost my sense of smell, or I have cacosmia, I can smell garbage or burning oil or smoke fumes, even though they are not present. They didn't know where to turn for help, and now they are a little bit more open to talk even to their general physician about olfaction. But what is important is that we see that it's not only about mental health, so how we feel with the loss of sense of smell, but it's also a part of our brain health. And it was really surprising to see that there are physical changes in the brain, in the orbitofrontal cortex, so the part of the brain that is responsible for processing smell signals. People who went through COVID and they lost their sense of smell, which is up to 30% of people who went through the disease, they lost 2% of cortex mass in the brain. So when you do brain scanning, you can see that the brain has gotten smaller in a very crucial area. So what I'm hoping for is that there will be more research that will be then directly available to people, because, you know, reading about all those research papers and looking at survey results, it's all very nice, but how we normal people, how can we benefit from it? So we need solutions.
So I want to dig even more into the COVID, because both of you have told me about what's called PTSD. So it's PTSD. I had to Google, and I said, and I'm laughing. Of course it's traumatic. It's called post-traumatic stress disorder. It's just the fact that I didn't know the shortcut. That's why I was laughing. So PTSD, I know it's a very important topic to mention here, because COVID also triggered that. So maybe I'll go back to you, Ruth.
Well, COVID did. There is a recent survey done by CNN and another health institute, and they found that of all the people who were surveyed, and it was a huge amount of people, because you can imagine CNN, right? That 90% of the people who were surveyed feel that PTSD stress is a huge problem, a major, major problem. And if you think of, let's put ourselves in the bodies of the nurses and the doctors who had to treat the victims. In fact, I know someone personally who was on a staff of a hospital in Virginia, and they had to make decisions who they were going to save or not save. And when you have to go into that role of making decisions who you're going to save, it's traumatic. So in the United States, I'm sure as well as everywhere around the world, because it was a worldwide pandemic, the medical professionals are suffering, and not just general public, but the medical professionals who had to live through that are suffering. And I have been contacted by several people in the holistic medical field wanting to know if I could help or come up with some kind of try to help a solution for calming for the nurses and the doctors, because they're looking into all the different ways to help people get through PTSD.
Yeah, but this is the point. I mean, is that you being asked for help, using your word, that through your olfactory training, you know that you can help some people who have this PTSD.
Yes.
So this is the point I wanted you to make clear.
I try the best I can. I did come out with Calm, Ayurvedic, 100% Ayurvedic fragrance, based on that conversation. It's something I've wanted to do for years, and people are finding it very helpful. But PTSD takes a long time to get over, right? I'm not a doctor or nurse, but it's something that it's one of these conditions that lasts a long time, and not just I'm not going to be the savior.
No. But you are helping finding a solution.
I'm helping as much as I can. Yes.
And you, Marta, you also had some interesting points on sanitizers and masks.
Yes, it was very surprising, because the input came from psychologists and therapists that people who experienced abuse and trauma from primary caregivers who would abuse alcohol, they did their best in normal life to avoid the smell of alcohol, so they wouldn't drink or they wouldn't socialize with people who drink. And when the pandemic began, we started sanitizing our hands with ethanol, and it was impossible for the victims of abuse to escape the smell of ethanol, so they would be traumatized everywhere they went, when they went to the mall or to the post office. Basically everywhere. So even, especially where the sanitizer is unscented, so they would be bombarded with the smell of ethanol, and they would be traumatized over and over again. And therapists would have a lot of complaints from people that it's not possible for them to function outside of their own home. So there was this conflict that you wanted to leave your house, but then for your mental health, it was better not to. But I was also trying to think if there were some positive aspects of, for example, masking. I work with people on the autism spectrum, and many of my students told me that they actually appreciate the fact that wearing a mask has been normalized, because if you want to protect yourself from sensory input, from smells, And olfactory triggers, you can just wear a mask wherever you are, and it's normal. Nobody's going to look at you and think that you are a weird person because you are protecting yourself from smells. And it's not only people on the spectrum, it's people who have sensory hypersensitivity, people who suffer from migraines. It's just normal to have a mask in your pocket, and you can just take it out, put it on your face, and then get some relief.
So that's one positive aspect,
Yes.
that you are less exposed if you want to be less exposed. Yes, so that's an interesting point. It's not only negatives, there are some positive outcomes. But now I would like to move to the topic of what are the different types of olfactory dysfunctions, because anosmia is one of them. But it's not the only one. So, yes, each, I think there's 5, correct? 5 olfactory dysfunctions, and each one of them is very specific, and it's measured in a different way. Marta, again.
Okay, so when it comes to olfactory dysfunctions, there is actually a new term. It's called PVOD. It's post-viral olfactory dysfunction, PVOD, and it's like an umbrella term for different dysfunctions that result from the damage that the virus does to the olfactory system. And of course, anosmia is the situation when you cannot smell anything at all. It also influences your nutrition. And as a result, people would just limit their food because they didn't enjoy eating food anymore. And they would be undernourished. People in developed countries would be malnourished or undernourished because they didn't give their bodies enough food. Then there is the parosmia is a general term for things that go wrong with the sense of smell. And one of those is cacosmia. When you smell unpleasant smells, the ones I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, it's usually this smell of burning or burnt oil, rotting garbage, rotting meat, or smoke, cigarette smoke, very unpleasant. And it also influences the way we eat, because apparently 80% of the input we get from food comes through the nose, not the mouth. So it's the sense of smell that is more important. And people would avoid eating because they had this impression that they are eating rotten food or something burnt. And again, problems with eating would result. And then phantosmia, so smelling smells that are not there. And I was approached by a person a couple of days ago when I would speak on a conference in real estate, so a completely different subject. And she asked me, how does it work that she can smell things that are not there? So it's basically olfactory hallucinations. It can be very disturbing because it alerts you and you start looking for the source of the scent and you can't find it. And there is also a very big influence on sleep. And I think Saudi Arabia can proudly say that they were the first to fund a government-funded research where they checked how the loss of sense of smell influences sleep patterns. And it works like this, that when we breathe, every time when we take a breath, so it's more or less 22,000 a day. We also smell when we sleep, even though it's not conscious. And the hypothalamus, that also is responsible for triggering the fight or flight response, it needs information from the outside whether we are safe or not. So when we are asleep, the sense of smell is still actively working and sending information also to the hypothalamus if we can sleep safely. And if this information is missing, it triggers the fight or flight response, so we wake up very early or we wake up a couple of times during the night. We cannot fall asleep as deeply as we normally would, and then we are not rested, which causes problems with memory, with concentration, which can lead to more, for example, road accidents. So this very simple thing, apparently simple thing, the fact that we cannot smell, we cannot sleep well, and it triggers it's like a domino effect that affects the whole life.
So this is really, for me, this is something I've never heard before. I mean, I'm very familiar with the fact that some people don't sleep well because they don't breathe well. This is very well known. But the fact that you don't sleep well because you don't smell well, it's not something we have read enough about. So I think this is a fantastic point you're making also with, the extract of the Saudi Arabia research. And then you use this word olfactory hallucinations. I think this is another major statement, that the olfaction can create, when it's not working properly, hallucinations. And that's severe, and you have to treat that, of course, but that's another point. Going to you, Ruth, what would you like to tell us about the dysfunctions, olfactory dysfunctions you've been working on, and you know, how you're working on in the United States on that front?
Well, I started. I basically got into the smell activities, the sense of smell activities to stimulate the sense of smell with people who have dementia, because my mother had dementia. My mother-in-law had Alzheimer's. And I, you know, being in the fragrance development business for almost 40 years, oh my goodness, I knew that the sense of smell would trigger memories, but also if you continue the act of mindful smelling, that it would help stimulate, you know, actually you would become more aware. So I started with this activity. I developed a smell, it's basically a kit of 6 different smells. You know, the smell of grass, the smell of chocolate, the smell of, you know, cinnamon and mint, and I thought about, you know, global basis, you know, what would resonate with people. You know, the most, and I started giving these smelling sessions, and so yes, I started working with people who have dementia, Alzheimer's, for instance, and then it segued into working with children with autism and people with learning disabilities, because I realized when I would give these activity sessions that it would stimulate conversation, and people would start, you know, the people with dementia would start expressing themselves, recalling memories, you know, going to storytelling and such. And so I thought, you know, what would this do? Could the act of smelling, this activity, also help children who have a difficult time expressing themselves? And so I went into an autism center down in Brooklyn, where a friend of mine has a nonverbal autistic son, and started giving smelling sessions to these children who are at different levels of the autism spectrum. And you know, I was called the Smell Lady, and I was very honored. Oh, the Smell Lady's here today. And it really, they enjoyed the whole practice of smelling. It brought them joy, just like it brings joy to the elderly people when you smell something that you like, the smell of chocolate, you know, and you think about all those different activities where chocolate is, and you know, it kind of like, the talk about domino effect. It was this domino effect when COVID happened, and there's the condition of parosmia and anosmia. I contacted Dr. Rachel Herz, and that study we were talking about earlier, that was a Dr. Rachel Herz study, where they also found out that, you know, people would rather lose their left little toe versus their, you know, before their sense of smell, you know. I mean, they would like to lose their sense of smell before their left toe, which is wild, but anyway. So I called Dr. Herz, and I said, who's a neuroscientist in the United States. She's a professor at Brown University and Boston College, and I asked her, could you develop a neuroscience-based smell training guide? And I would have to, the word was pivot at the point, but I repurposed my smelling kits for smell training. And you traditionally hear about smell training where they use eucalyptus, clove, lemon, and rose, I believe, the 4 different essential oils to stimulate the sense of smell. My kits are different because they can also train you that this is what grass smells like, this is what chocolate smells like. And so people with parosmia as well as anosmia have been using the kits. Actually, not just the, you know, anosmia, not just from COVID, but people who have had aneurysms have been contacting me, and hospitals have purchased them for occupational therapy for people who have had comas or strokes. So yes, I mean, I've kind of like this domino effect, it just started happening. And does that answer the question?
Absolutely, it is spot on. I just want to, you know, put the needle on something even more specific, which is regression. Because I know you have a very interesting experience, because regression can be good if it takes you to a lovely place, but regression can be tough if it takes you to a bad place.
It can be tough, and that was the exploratory part of when I started developing fragrances. Back in 2016, after my mother passed away, people would say, "Oh, you should show baby powder. You should develop a fragrance that smells like Tide detergent or Downy." All these different various household smells that are very familiar to people. There would have been a problem with that because I would have had to have dealt with Procter & Gamble and Unilever and all. It's like, okay, here's a takeoff of your Irish Spring. But going to Irish Spring, it was when I decided not to go that route. It was because of a woman who, when I was showing Irish, the smell of Irish Spring
It's
soap.
sorry to interrupt,
Yeah.
it's a very famous soap in the United States for men.
Yes, well,
I mean,
I
I know I shouldn't cut it like that. It's not proper, but just to...
If you like the way it smells, you use it, right? Non-gender.
Exactly.
Anyway, so this woman in my smelling session said, it reminds me of my husband, and her husband had passed away. And for me, she wanted to keep that little paper strip in her drawer. She asked me, "Can I keep this?" And I said, "You can keep it." For me, it was sad. I almost started crying right there because but it turned on the signal that I have to be careful with what I select to go into these kits because I don't want to trigger any bad memories. And so that's why, chocolate is one of them, because a lot of us have really good memories of chocolate. Chocolate is Valentine's Day or Mother's Day or Christmas, Easter egg bunnies. And so, I went through this whole process, the thought process of what smells, what scents, aromas would be the most appropriate that would recall good memories versus bad memories, right?
So now, touching on the good memories and the sugary, the comfort that's usually coming with, sweet smells, I want to ask you, Marta, is it really possible that just by smelling chocolate, like Ruth said, or sugar, our brain gets stimulated, with a happy hormone? Does that really happen? How deep it is?
I really love the way your face changed when you started talking about chocolate and sugary scents. Of course, there is Mother's Day and one's birthday, but I would say let's just have chocolate every day. What's important when it comes to chocolate and sugary scents is vanillin. So this is a molecule that is found in milk, and it's found in milk not only of humans, but many other mammals, as well as modified milk. So this is the first molecule we receive when we come to the outside world, because of course we can get in touch with different volatile molecules via amniotic fluid while we are still in the womb. But when we get born and when we get fed for the first time, no matter who it is, if it's the mother who feeds us with her breast or if it's another person who feeds us with a bottle, there is always vanillin. So when we drink the milk and while someone is holding us close to their body, this is the first moment when we can experience this very intense bond and safety, the feeling of safety and belonging with the person that's feeding us. And we subconsciously, we are drawn to vanillin and to vanillic scents, and it doesn't mean that everybody likes vanillic perfume, or you can just dislike vanilla in fine fragrance, but in blind tests, scents that evoke the most positive emotional response, they always have vanillin, because it takes us back to those very, this primary memory of being fed and held close, being 100% safe, depending on another person, but then also knowing that we are safe and that we are going to be fine. So this is the magic of chocolate.
Great. Now I know. now we know. The word is, the code is vanillin. This is the primary kind of reaction.
So it's not cravings, it's not being weak, people. It's biology. We just need vanillin. We need chocolate to be happy and feel safe.
Great. So now let's touch more on neuroscience. I know there's a lot going on. Possibly we are not aware of it. It comes from all over the world. It can be the United States, it can be Northern Europe, it can be South, it can be Saudi Arabia, like you said, really in all directions. But which ones would you pick for the audience today? You know, what key neuroscience projects? You want to go, Ruth?
In the United States, basically, there's Johns Hopkins that's doing a lot of studies, as well as the Cleveland Clinic. I'm not going to go into detail again because that's beyond my ability to verbalize everything. But there is research because they are finding that scent. And there's been several studies, especially, because I know Dr. Hurst personally. I know that she's doing a lot of studies with other medical professionals, and that's her specialty, is the psychology of the sense of smell and taste. And so they're again, they are finding that the sense of smell can help emotions. It can help provide people with feeling more comfort, with sleep. I'm an insomniac for the past 2 years, and so I'm among millions of people who are insomniacs, and so they are finding that certain scents can help people sleep better, and this it goes to show also that there are larger companies, because of this research going on, there are larger companies who are developing fragrances to diffuse in the air, going back a little bit to the whole chocolate and helping people to eat and to induce appetite. There are companies who are diffusing fragrances to help people stay calm, to help people sleep, to help people generate an appetite for eating. So, the research is there. It's quieter than all the other research. And someone told me once, it's the reason why is because, and I'm going to circle back to the Alzheimer's dementia, because that's where I do a lot of my reading and concentration, is that Alzheimer's there's not a lot of funding compared to some of the other diseases that we know of, and so it's underfunded. But I think that's going to change a little bit. Let's hope, because they're finding the holistic benefit of the sense of smell.
Great. So we are moving on to Marta, because you also have been following research, psychology, neuroscience, and what's happening, and that will have an outcome in the future. So tell us more, your condensed take.
Okay, so if I were to choose only one example, I think I would relate to a very trending subject of obesity treatment. And it's another pandemic that we are experiencing in the world, not only in the US. And I'm sure you have heard about this drug that was initially designed to treat type 2 diabetes that is now being prescribed and abused to treat obesity. And there is a very interesting study that gives us hope, because right now it's on, this research is done on mice, so there is a long way from mice to people, but maybe one day we will benefit from this research that shows a very interesting connection between the fact that we can smell the food we eat and our body mass. So in this study, there were 2 groups of mice. One group of mice was infected with diphtheria, which causes temporary smell loss. So the mice were fine after some time. They just lost the sense of smell for a couple of weeks. And the other group was just healthy mice with no modifications. And both groups of animals were fed a very high-calorie diet. And after a couple of weeks, we could see that the mice who could smell their food, so the ones that had not been injected with diphtheria, that they put on weight 16%. And it was only fat tissue. So they grew 16% of their body mass in only adipose tissue, whereas the mice that were on the same high-calorie diet that exceeded what they needed, they didn't put on weight at all. So another study followed, and mice that were perfectly healthy, they started eating more calories than they needed, and when their sense of smell was destroyed, they started losing weight despite still being on this high-calorie diet. So the conclusion seems to be smelling food makes us put on weight, and perhaps the new solution is going to be get rid of your sense of smell and as a reward, you will lose weight, or you will be able to keep a lower body mass, which brings us back to the first study we mentioned at the very beginning. How much are you ready to give up to become lean or to stay slim? Because, you know, food, just like Ruth said at the very beginning, food is a huge element of our life. It's also a bonding activity. Food makes us happy. So how much are we ready to sacrifice? Not smelling the food, just to stay, so not tasting the food actually, not enjoying the food, just to stay slim or to lose weight. So this is something that I'm going to follow closely.
This is interesting because it sounds counterintuitive completely. I mean, we've all heard of the fact that if you don't taste, well, your food, then you're going to typically put some salt, use over salt or too much sugar because you don't know. Right? And now you're telling us that there's a different angle of research that takes it exactly the other way around, like the opposite. So that's incredible. But there's another research or area of research that I think it's interesting to bring to the audience, which is also the effects of the environment, of the smells that we catch just by being outside and being exposed to, gasoline fumes and. You want to also talk about that one?
Yes, so we are bombarded with many chemicals that also have accompanying volatile substances that give us the impression of smell. So when we inhale, for example, car fumes, it's not as much the smell of the fumes that is bad for our health. It's like the rest of the chemicals that are present in there. But many volatile substances are also hormone disruptors. And we can see that people have problems with fertility, both men and women, that women find it more difficult to get pregnant and then to carry the pregnancy full term. It's also connected to the concentration of musks in drinking water, because we use a lot of detergents, and the more detergents for washing our bodies and washing our clothes we use, then the musks go back to the water pool. It's especially valid in areas where water is taken from lakes. So, for example, Canada has a huge problem with too much musks in drinking water, where men have started having severe fertility problems. So this is also something. We are at a perfumery event, so we have lots of beautiful perfumes around, but then the question also is, when we apply them on our bodies and then we wash them in the shower in the evening or in the morning, the water goes back to the water pool that we later on ingest. So it's another question to ask.
On this front, the United States is also working on this matter?
There's a study that they're starting studies on this, because they have found that in the areas where there's high pollution from all the the fumes. There was at one time where they started seeing that the people who were living in the industrial areas were affected and therefore causing anosmia. And anosmia is one of the early indications of Alzheimer's. So again, I'm connecting everything to Alzheimer's and dementia. But recently there is a gerontologist in Maryland who found that a lot of her patients with dementia were living in highly populated areas. And so there was this correlation that she started making, and now there is a study going on about, okay, how do we connect the environment that we live in? If you're living in, I've lived and worked in the New York City area, so, the smog was pretty intense sometimes. So, they're, I think, currently in a study right now, and it'll be interesting what they find with that. Yeah. But on the other hand, in another study, actually it's the Alzheimer's Association and the World Health Organization who has said that without, again, Alzheimer's, that the people who are, inflicted with this disease are in lower and middle income areas. So those really aren't necessarily people who live right inside the city, especially in Manhattan. You can't afford to live in Manhattan. But then, so it's going to be interesting what the findings are of this study. And I want to also add one more thing about the studies that are going on. A doctor in New York at NYU Langone contacted me about Essential Awakening Smell and Memory Kits, and he was recommending it to some of his patients. He's an otolaryngologist or a rhinologist. Some people call them eyes, ears, and nose doctor. And he started doing a study for smell training to make sure that it, works. And he said now that we have less COVID cases, less people are losing their sense of smell. So his research has been stalled.
Oh, that's very
Because, yeah,
unfortunate.
it is unfortunate. But the Monell Institute over in Philadelphia always has something going on. They're world renowned for olfactive research. Olfactive, not just the sense of smell, but the sense of taste, because they're part of the same system.
Good. Well, I've heard a lot about research and university hospitals or public hospitals in Berlin, in Brussels, who are definitely using, they haven't unplugged the project, luckily, they're using the olfactory smell trainings, or even diffusers, especially for treating cancer, for patients who've had to undergo chemotherapy, and unfortunately there's a high percentage of them who lose their sense of smell, so they're helping those patients recover it, or they're even helping with the diffuser of a nice scent approved by the hospital while they're undergoing a cancer treatment, because it has such a powerful impact on their well-being. So it's attacked in both ways, but it seems to be a hot topic definitely in this Belgium hospital, university hospital in Berlin, and the public hospital in Brussels. So yeah, I think there was another research that was going on in Sweden with the Karolinska Institute. Was it you, Marta, you wanted to
I'm not
mention?
sure if it's the institute that carried out the research, so I'm not going to refer to that, but just a word of comment on what Ruth started, and then you continued. Different areas where scent is used as therapy in very simple solutions that don't require any technologically advanced equipment, for example, is addiction centers and rehab centers, where people go for detox from alcohol, stimulants, opioids, and so on, where scents are used to modulate mood, also facilitate sleep, and then in turn, it's easier for people to maintain motivation to remain sober, to regulate their emotions, to resist cravings. So a couple of years ago, we would treat aromatherapy as part of beauty treatment. So people would go to have a massage, or they would go to a spa, and then we would think that aromatherapy is something that makes your life beautiful. And I would say now aromatherapy is something that makes your life possible. And this is a different take on the subject.
Very interesting. Aromatherapy makes your life possible. Back to you, Ruth.
I just want to add one thing about your comment about vanilla, that a friend of mine who's a doctor of radiology, he doesn't just read x-rays, he actually helps build MRIs. And he told me several years ago that the doctors were now experimenting with vanilla to put into the MRI machines, because you go in, I don't know if you've ever had an MRI, but it's kind of a scary situation. It's very stressful.
Siemens implemented this, yes.
He helped build some of the Siemens MRIs. So he said, we're using that we're putting vanillin or vanilla into the MRI capsules to help people stay calm. So I just wanted to add that earlier.
Very interesting. So it has a very practical, immediate consequence for the good of patients. That's excellent. I have one last question to both of you, and then we're going to show a video to show you an illustration, a live illustration of the impact of smell on. So the last question is, both of you have dedicated a significant amount of time on this topic. You've decided to specialize. You've even mentioned you're doing it pro bono sometimes. What is your mission? Why are you doing this?
Do you want to start with me, or?
Yeah, go first, Ruth.
I've already discussed my mission. My mother had dementia, and my mother-in-law had Alzheimer's. Both have passed away. After my mother passed away, I used to visit her in the assisted living communities. In the United States, it's almost like a habit where families put their elders into a home, right? Outside of the home, outside of the household. So when I used to visit her, I would see that there was an absence of interaction, social interaction. Yes, they would have bingo hour, or toss a ball around, or someone would come in and play the piano music. And I thought, I used to leave depressed from these places because I would see so many of these people, and they all have dementia. This is a dementia assisted living community. And I thought, having, this career in the fragrance development business, developing celebrity perfumes and all kinds of, fancy stuff, I thought, if there's something that I can do for the seniors living with this disease, I'm going to create an activity to help stimulate the sense of smell so that they can tell, that would result in telling stories or recalling memories, something very positive and joyful. And so I've done, as a volunteer, I have gone to probably over 100 assisted living communities, with hundreds of, accumulated audience. And I started to see very quickly how joyful they were. How it was like, for me, it was like my own therapy, knowing that this activity was bringing people together. It's not just the attendees, but also the people, who work with the elderly. They were really like, wow, we're talking to each other. And I'm like, yes, because, knowing that isolation is one of the biggest issues with the senior population. Actually, it just exacerbated with COVID because everybody was locked away, right? But isolation creates depression and all kinds of different health issues, right? Social isolation is dangerous. And so, I really, like I said, it was a domino effect. One thing led to the next. My daughter is ASD. I had a brother who had Down syndrome. And so it was a very passionate kind of undertaking, a very personal and passionate undertaking that I decided I was just going to do it. I didn't expect to make a lot of money from it. I just thought, if I can do something to help people, especially underserved populations like the elderly or people who have disabilities, learning disabilities, speech communication disabilities, if I can help them in some way, I'm going to do it. And if the sense of smell and all these sessions that I was going to give, if it can help them, I will feel totally wonderful.
Well, you blessed. That was very touching, very personal, and very impressive. So, but to you, Marta.
Thank you. What I would like to do personally is just to further normalize the discussion around olfaction and to demystify the subject of smell, of smelling, using our nose, because, I've always been thinking our nose sits in the middle of our face for a reason, and we tend to ignore it. The whole world is built around a vision, and we are focused on what we see, and of course the sight is the most valued sense we have, but the sense of smell is something that makes us live fuller. I think we can also regulate our emotions. We can create bonds with people. We can create rituals within families. So I want to educate and just implement olfaction in daily education from kindergartens, because I work with children as young as 3. And they are very natural recipients of what smelling is, and they are very open to smelling. Very often it's the children who teach their parents how to use their nose. And just to finish, there is a new area that I would like to explore and get involved more, which is the rise of artificial intelligence and using scent, in the uncanny valley, where we try to blur the differences between humans and robots. There is an interesting study that asked the question, if a robot smelled like a person, would we be tricked? And the answer so far is no. So the smell of hexanol, it's a molecule that is found in freshly cut grass, but also in human sweat. When we can smell it from a person, we feel reassured. But when we smell it from a machine, we don't start trusting them. So this is a very interesting area of research, and I'm following that closely.
Great. So I'm just going to go, for you, if you want to make pictures, I know some of you have already done it. This is an extract. You know, Marta prepared this. There's a lot more, but, you know, if you want to dig in a little bit more. And then if I go back, this is the one of Ruth that she's prepared. And I'm going to show the YouTube,
the Marseillaise.
national, the first one. No.
Which one? This one down
Oh,
here?
yeah,
The
sorry.
Marseillaise?
The Marseillaise. But
Let me give a
she's
preamble to
going
that.
to explain the background before I start the video.
Right, it was, this is just a quick video from 2019, I guess, right before the pandemic, I guess. One of the assisted living communities for memory care, and I'm giving a smelling session. I always give a little bit of a, let's say, spiel about the sense of smell and how important it is, and that it brings back memories. And I lived in Paris in the 80s, and so I started talking about how I can still smell the baguette. You know, I would intentionally go into the patisserie so that I could smell the baguettes, and just, you know, I'd buy a baguette just to have that smell. And about the rotisserie chicken, you know, if you know France, then you know that the rotisserie chicken smells in the streets, and it's like, oh my gosh, I've got to have some of that chicken. So I'm telling the story, and this man started talking about being raised in Paris, and when actually being saved, actually, when the Americans came in to save them from the Nazis, and then he starts singing the Marseillaise, and it's, mind you, this is years ago. You probably won't recognize me in here. Oh, that's okay. But it was one of those wonderful moments where these two people met each other. They were sitting next to each other. They didn't know they spoke French.
Because I have no idea which...
I have a YouTube channel that if we can't get it, please do go to it. It's, you know, you can find me under Ruth Sutcliffe, the Scent Guru group, but there's multiple videos that I was able to take. You know, mind you, because they're people living with dementia, I had to get special permission from the families and from the center. So, you know, I don't have a videographer. The videos are taken either by the, you know, the activities director or someone else who was there. So.
Do you know, Marta, how to carry on? Because I don't. Yeah, which I don't. So.
Oh.
Do you have one?
But I do. It's Ruth Sutcliffe. Just, yeah, if you do a search in YouTube, Ruth Sutcliffe.
Oh, sorry.
But everybody, you know, if we can't do it, you know, please do go. You'll see a lot of videos that are homemade, I guess we could say, not you know, choreography or scripted. But it's very heartwarming when the gentleman he introduced himself as Jean-Claude, and we started talking about France, and then he started singing the Marseillaise, and the woman next to him started singing along, and there was another woman who was mouthing the words, and I thought, wow, this is just amazing. And what I do is I say, you see, this is what this is all about. We are talking to each other. We are sharing stories. We're you know, sharing memories. And the woman and the man didn't know. She was from Switzerland. He was from France. And I said, you didn't know that he spoke French, did you? Until he started singing the Marseillaise. And she said, no, well, you know, yeah, no. And they left holding hands.
Oh, that's a great story.
I was like, I think I'm going to cry. but it's very sweet. It's
Yeah,
very
it's a
sweet-
fantastic story. Sorry it didn't work for the video, but you can see it since you have the link. So are there any questions for Marta or Ruth? It's your time to ask.
I have one thing, which is, I think smelling, in my opinion, because I enjoyed it so much what you were talking, there's one more that actually smelling is participating in life. And it's also more basic. So when you are smelling, it
Okay.
is
So Thomas, you smelled
old
red?
function. It is the oldest function. The cell
It's this one?
and out of this, it is more, let's say it is more like every smell is a condition. It is more that no smell has to be bad and no smell has to be good. And so actually when we can teach more to smell, it is like the possibility that people participate more in life itself.
Acidic bonding concentrate, leave-in treat.
Or it has nothing to do with past, it has to do something with life itself. It is more like, also not with the brain, it is more basic, it is more cellular. It is more on the cellular level. And this I like to it.
So thank you for your comment. I think you also touched a very important area that it's very demanding and sometimes almost impossible to step away from our experiences and from the emotions we have already experienced in contact with the smell, yes. So it requires education and in fact training. Not only people who have olfactory disorders should have smell training. Smell training should be a part of our daily hygiene, like, taking a shower, brushing our teeth, and just being mindful. So like sensory mindfulness, this is also very important.
This is more like that we would not exist if we would not be able to smell. This is much more basic, like it is nice to smell here.
Yes, of course.
It is more,
And one more thing you mentioned, that smelling doesn't only happen in the nose. It's true that other cells, like the sperm cells or the egg cells inside our bodies, our heart has olfactory receptors. So this is something that is very under-discussed. And it's a good start just to Google it, olfactory receptors in the human body, and we will be surprised in how many different parts of our body we have those receptors, places that don't really react with the outside world, with the atmospheric air that we breathe. So thanks for your input.
and this I like also at your talk, like I immediately was smelling more than you were talking.
That's amazing.
And so
Thank
I
you.
think it was a nice idea to have this discussion.
Perfect.
Thank you so much. Thanks. We have one more question in the back.
Yeah, this is what I thought.
I don't think I've heard any research, so I wouldn't like to give you any false facts. I'm sorry.
Okay, so we have the help. Thank you so much. We have your video.
Je dois établir contre nous la tyrannie, l'étendard ensanglant élevé, l'étendard ensanglant élevé. Entendez-vous dans les campagnes mugir les féroces soldats qui viennent jusque dans nos bras, égorger nos fils et nos compagnes.
Aux armes citoyens.
It's just like Edith Piaf. I'm telling you.
Are there French schools in the area that are,
Yeah.
or children? I mean,
Yes,
so
there are.
they can
Down in
go
Larchmont.
Okay.
Down in Larchmont,
Oh, yeah.
there's the French
yeah.
school. Okay, so,
I don't recognize this.
you know, one thing that's very important about this session, the reason why we do this is not just to get in touch with our sense of smell, but it's to tell stories. And look what happened today. You two met each other and you didn't know each other spoke French.
Mais bien sûr,
So isn't that the magic
mais bien sûr.
of being
No,
together?
You have people speaking French. So.
No, but you didn't know that he spoke French
Oh no.
until
Because
today.
if I had known, I would not have.
There you go.
started.
So you met each other.
My French name is Jean-Claude.
Oh,
Jean-Claude numéro 1.
my ex-husband was Claude, and I have a friend named Jean-Claude who's a perfumer. So here we are.
Yeah.
Smell this and try to describe this one. This is the strongest smell today. I saved the strongest one for last. So it's try to describe it.
Peppermint.
Peppermint. Teresa, do you mint?
I smell smoky.
Smoky. You're right. It's smoky.
Siamo a Gardo nel Puntland.
Pardon?
What was the scent?
It was mint. But you know, there's never a wrong. Can you hear me? It's important that we say that there's never a wrong answer. Everybody smells differently, right? Your impression of a fragrance or an odor could be different from someone else's. We have a different vocabulary. That other video was very interesting too, but you know, I know that we're cutting ourselves. We have to be cut off, but the video that came up on the screen before of the man, he was with a speech pathologist who uses my other sensory kit called MindScent that comes with visual clues and facts. And so she uses it. A lot of speech pathologists are using it now, where because it's a multi-sensory kind of vehicle, and they didn't have one before. But the speech pathologists who use it tell me that they love it because it's a multi-sensory, vehicle for including the sense of smell that helps them express themselves. And so in that video, he's talking about bread. And
Yeah,
the
it
smell of
triggers a
bread.
conversation. That's the point.
It's expressive language.
Yeah.
That they can express through this vehicle that is, these aromas, these various aromas.
Thank you very much. We're coming to the end, and yes.
Thank you for coming to listen.
Thank you for coming and staying with us.
Yes, thank you.